So, hello, Susan, and welcome to the show. I'm really looking forward to our talk today. I haven't covered this group on the podcast at all. And I know that you have a story to tell, and this is going to be a great education for myself and the listeners. And you have a lot to talk to us about in terms of cult activism. So, would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Okay. Thanks for having me, Casey. Yeah. Well, I'm a ex-member of NXIVM, and I went in early. I was one of the early members. I went in 2000, and I left in 2009. So went to NXIVM's actual second 16-day intensive. I think they started in 98, and they just had evening classes. And um, what I what I was told is that they had evening classes that took place, and then they started to ask some people to come to classes. So it was just in the Albany area at that time. And some people said, well, I don't have time to do that kind of stuff. And so then what they did was they started to combine those classes into an intensive format. And I was actually at a training in Detroit, Michigan, and I had a wellness center not in Seattle, but in the Seattle area, about 45 minutes south of Seattle. And what I wanted to do was create a training program so that people could come in, kind of heal the emotional aspects that they were missing, and then also work on their business skills. So I have a master's degree in psychology, and I'm also a massage therapist. And uh, I was working on people that had a lot of uh, sexual abuse issues. And so sometimes I would just do one-on-one counseling with them, and then sometimes I would do actual body work on them. And then also worked on people that had been in traumatic injuries, that had a lot of emotional components to their traumatic injuries. And so I did a combination of body work and then a combination of emotional work based on the trauma that they had been in. And then I created a wellness center where we had people that did body work, people that did uh, personal training, and then other components. We had a chiropractor and stuff like that. And the one component that I felt that was missing was just an intensive kind of um, workshop that people could come in and just like do an intensive amount of body work. So I had been going to a lot of training programs to find something that I felt was a good fit, where people could come and just do an intensive kind of maybe 3-day, 5-day kind of thing. So I'd heard about this training program in Detroit, Michigan. And so, and this woman had an international training program. She taught internationally, and then people came to her training program internationally. And while I was there, I was going to bring her to the Pacific Northwest to do her training. And while I was there, she said, this is going to be my last training. I'm going to go to Albany, New York, and study with this gentleman, Keith Ranieri. And I had gone with a couple of friends of mine, and we all looked at each other like, we came here to bring her to the Pacific Northwest. And now she's telling us she's going to close her training facility. And so the whole weekend, it was a Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday training program. And the whole weekend, all she kept doing was promoting this executive success programs, you know? And we're all like looking at each other like, well, what does this guy have that she doesn't have, you know? Kind of thing. And so she invited us onto a conference call because at that time they were really promoting this training program. And so we listened to the conference call, and at first I was kind of turned off from it because it was $6,000. And to me, that was a lot of money to spend to go to a 16-day program. Plus it was 16 days out of my business. And so my two friends that I went with decided they were going to go because it had to be something phenomenal for this woman to shut down her entire business to go. to this program. And so they had if you enrolled 3 people, you got your $6,000 back. And I thought, well, if it's good, I could probably get 3 people to take the training program. And then they were also looking for people that wanted to open up satellite training facilities. And so I thought, well, if this really is what, they're saying it is, then maybe this is the program that I'm looking for to open up my, I could bring it to the Pacific Northwest and integrate it into my training program and into my wellness center. And so off we went, in December of 2000. And I'm thinking like, am I crazy? Am I, like, what am I doing? And that kind of stuff. And so a lot of people that were in that Detroit training program went to this December training that they had. And so then we stayed afterwards for a couple of days, and they went through the whole matrix of this is what it looks like if you open a satellite training program and stuff like that. And so I really liked the training, and there wasn't really anything culty about it at that particular time. The only thing that was culty about it is you had to wear a sash, and you had to take your shoes off before you went into the training program, and you had to bow to the training room before you went into it and stuff like that. But I had taken martial arts, in high school. And so you had to do all those things before and they said, every time, like when you wore a sash, they said, well, what other things do you do where you have to wear some kind of garment like that? So they used like the brownies, and they talked about martial arts. And so what they did was they try to normalize all of the things that were weird, like, well, where else do you, and I talked about, well, like you have to bow to the sensei, those kinds of things. And so every part that was abnormal, like you wouldn't normally, like you don't bow to the room when you walk into a workplace, but there are places where they do that. In Japan, they do a lot of bowing and stuff like that. And so every time they did something that was out of the norm, then they would normalize it. And so it was kind of, that's how they normalized everything that was abnormal. Like when Keith was called Vanguard, although he was nowhere to be found. They kept him in the background, that kind of thing. So they normalized Vanguard, they normalized prefect by saying, well, where do you call people a title? Like the mayor of the city, those kinds of things. So all of that stuff was totally normalized in the training. And then, like, they have a 12-point mission statement that you would read, like, well, where do you read a preamble kind of thing? Like in the United States, you say the Pledge of Allegiance, those kinds of things. So all of that stuff was normalized in that kind of stuff. And so the 16-day training is, in retrospect, is kind of like a slow drip, like a soaker hose. That's how I explain it to people now. It's kind of like you don't realize you're being soaked, because it's such a slow drip kind of thing. And so I went to the training, and then, I thought, well, I can, open a satellite center, those kinds of things. So in order to do that, you had to become a proctor, up the ranks. So in order to become a proctor, you had to become a coach, and you had to become a 4-stripe coach before you could become a proctor, those kinds of things. So I became really excited about all of those things because it fit into my goals of what I wanted to do in my business. And so I worked really hard, and I, grew up the ranks and stuff like that, and then opened a satellite center out on in Washington State. And then their collateral with me was the debt that it took me to do all of those things. So I'm in hook, line, and sinker by the time, I start to get red flags kind of thing. And so that was the beginning journey into ESP at the time, executive success programs. It had moved into NXIVM. And so that was kind of my introduction into what was the craziness of what we know NXIVM now as the sex cult and all of those kinds of things that you read in the international news. I mean, none of that stuff was going on when I first started to go. It was just like this 16-day program, and that's all there was.
So I've talked a little bit about how the the DOS part of NXIVM is something that is focused on a lot by the media, and that's where the title sex cult comes from. But through listening to your story and understanding a little bit of your experiences, there's so much more in terms of coercive control that happened in NXIVM that is not linked to the stuff that was happening in the inner circle and in DOS. And I think to understand how DOS was able to happen in the first place, we really need to understand the big picture of NXIVM, which includes financial coercion, which you were subjected to, as well as other forms of coercive control, which we'll most likely cover in this episode. But as you've mentioned there, it's already starting to, even in the early stages of your involvement, there's some questionable things are happening, but language is being used in such a clever way that it's covering up all of those things that might typically be seen as red flags. And you mentioned that this was in December 2000, but that NXIVM had started in 98.
Yeah, that's when that's when Keith and Nancy started to formulate the whole concept and started put classes together, started test the classes and stuff. And at that time, Keith and Nancy taught classes, taught classes together. But by the time I went, Keith wasn't really involved in the day-to-day operations. He was kind of kept aside. I mean, he didn't come into our training until the 5th day, and he just did a forum. And then it was New Year's Eve, and they did a New Year's Eve party, that kind of thing. And it was, people either came to the first 5 days or they stayed all 16 days. And so then they had a New Year's Eve party. And then, we didn't see him again until he came to the business part of it. Like if you wanted to create a satellite center. So he wasn't really, around that much. And the whole time I was in NXIVM, you didn't really see him that often, that kind of thing. But, DOS happened long after I left NXIVM, and the catalyst for changing the name to Executive Success Programs to NXIVM was really when the Forbes article came out, where Edgar Brofman, called it a cult and stuff like that. And I think their whole mindset behind changing it from Executive Success Programs to NXIVM was twofold. One is that they were trying to sneakily change the name, because now Executive Success Programs was, tied to cult, and then Rick Ross found out about the name change. And then it came out kind of in the press that, they're trying to change the name. And then 2 is that they started to develop other programs. So NXIVM was kind of the umbrella company. And then they had Executive Success Programs, and then they started other things like Jeunesse and other programs, that kind of thing. But once the Brofman sisters came in, that's when things really started to escalate, because now they had, billions, or not billions, but they had millions of dollars of money to their, they had money available to them to do things that they didn't have to do. But I started to notice things early on, and it's funny, people have asked me, like, what made you more observant to certain things? And I don't really know what that is. I think I was just observant as a child, based on the family I grew up in and stuff like that. But I have a tendency to notice people's moods like if somebody's kind of grouchy and they're not normally grouchy, or if somebody's angry and that kind of stuff. And I think that's probably what drew me to the world of psychology kind of thing. And but like when Keith would come to the center, I noticed that certain women were attracted to him, and that he was attracted to certain women. And so I didn't spend a lot of time with Keith. I spent more time with Nancy Salzman, and she kind of took me under her wing, and she was going to mentor me and stuff like that. And so I would ask Nancy, I would say, is Keith sleeping with so and so? And she'd be like, well, we don't talk about that. And I'd be like, yeah, but that's not really appropriate for him to be sleeping with students, kind of thing. And we'd be like, well, we don't talk about that. And then, the next time I would be in Albany, because I was in Albany a lot, because I was training myself to get to coach, and then get to proctor, and then get to, those kinds of things. And then also become a head trainer and stuff like that. And then I'd notice him with another woman, and I'd be like, and then I'd go to Nancy and I'd be like, well, is he sleeping with so-and-so? And she goes, well, we don't talk about that. And I'd be like, well, maybe he shouldn't be so amorous with, so-and-so at the center. If he's going to sleep with, different women, then maybe he should keep it outside of the center, kind of thing. And and then it started to really bother me that, this was going on. And then she, she told me things that she probably shouldn't tell me. And I don't know what her motivation behind that was. Maybe she just thought, hey, we're good friends, and you have a center, and so I can divulge these things to you. And she told me that Keith had lost $68 million of the Brofman's money in the commodities market. And I'm like, I just kind of blew a fuse. And I'm like, why is he borrowing money for students? Like $68 million. I knew they didn't have that kind of money to pay him back. And it's just like, well, he's trying this mathematical formula, and she blamed it on their father. Like he knew that Keith was in the commodities market, so he bet against them, so he could lose the money. And I'm like, how would he even know that Keith was in the commodities market? Like that didn't make any sense to me. And like, she was just trying to justify Keith borrowing like $68 million. That, to me, that's a lot of money,
Yeah, it's not your average everyday loan, is it? Oh, could you just I forgot my lunch money. Can you just let me borrow $68 million?
Right. And then Sarah before that had told me that well, the whole Forbes article was over the fact that the girls had loaned them $2 million, and their dad had found out that Keith and Nancy hadn't signed a contract with them to repay them. And he got mad about that, because that's not how he raised his girls, and they at that time had no way of really paying them back. And then Sarah had told me that I'd gone to Ireland to train a intensive for Sarah. And Sarah told me that Nancy had said, well, why don't I coach you guys for a year to repay you? And I said, she's going to coach you for $1 million each. And Sarah's like, yeah, she's worth $1 million. And I'm thinking like, oh man, you guys got snowed, kind of thing. Like, and I'm like, oh, they're just so taking advantage of you guys and your money, and maybe for the Brofmans, $1 million is like me spending, $1,000 for Nancy to coach me for a year, kind of thing. But it was just like, so I'm hearing all of this stuff, and I'm going like, oh my God, you guys are just, taking these girls for everything they can give you. And that's what made Edgar mad. And that's when he realized that his daughters were being taken advantage of. And so, and that's, that's kind of what started the ball rolling with their dad, and, why he got so angry at Nancy and stuff. And so I'm hearing things from Nancy that she probably shouldn't be telling me, because she knew they kept trying to get me to not pay my taxes. Nancy Salzman and Barbara Jeske, they're trying to get me to not pay my taxes. And then Pam Cafrids, who was really close to Keith, I didn't know this at the time, but there are different ways they try to get collateral on you. One way to get collateral on me was to get me to go deep into debt by building my center. And then another way was that they, like, well, you need to take this training. They started level 2 trainings. And so it's like, oh, you got to take this training. And oh, you got to get this training. Like the first training that they had was a level 2A. And so I went back to the level 2A. And then while I was there, they started a level 2B training. And it's like, oh, you have to stay for this level 2B training. And then while we're there for the level 2B training, then they said, oh, we're going to do a level 2C training, and it's like, and they were all $10,000 each, and so before you know it, you're like $30,000 in debt, and it's 3 weeks, so I'm 3 weeks away from my home. So you're paying for a place to stay, paying for a rental car, and before you know it, you're $30,000 more in debt, kind of thing. And before you know it, it's just like that you get deeper in debt, and you can't build your business while you're away from your home. And like, if you don't go, then they start to take things away from you. Like, oh, well, we're not going to let you be a head trainer. We're not going to let you get to this level, and we're not going to let you do this. And then so then Pam Cafrids, who was like Keith's girlfriend, comes up to me and she says, oh, Nancy is, because she's the prefect, she's lonely all the time and she needs a good friend. And I said, well, I spend a lot of time with her anyways. And she says, no, she just needs somebody she could really talk to and be with and stuff. But what I don't know is she's trying to groom me to be like Nancy's friend, you know. I'm like, I didn't know it, like things like that just like over my head. But I'm in a committed relationship, kind of thing. And so I get in Nancy's car a little bit later during that trip. And so Nancy, we're going off to coffee, and Nancy's like, she reaches over and she grabs the inside of my leg and starts to rub the inside of my leg. And she's like, Susan, if we ever have sex, you could never talk about it because I'm the prefect. And I'm like, I just froze, because I didn't know what to do. Like, I was in the Navy for almost 10 years, and I had some sexual harassment, but like never like that, just guys saying stuff, kind of thing. And I'm just like, I didn't know what to do, because here she is, my boss, kind of, sort of, because we're all contracted employees, or we're all contractors. And I just didn't know what to do, because I didn't know if she was just kind of joking, or like what she was doing. And she knows I'm in a committed relationship. And, she was kind of a flirty person with people anyways, but like, you don't touch people that way, kind of thing. So it was just like so much crap that went on, it's like, and then she would do stuff like that, it's like she would like, come up and rub you like on your back, kind of in a sexual manner and stuff like that. And then one time it was during a V week, and she called me and she said, why don't you come out early? And I said, oh, okay, I could do that. And she goes, and you can stay at my house. And I'm like, well, okay, well, like, why would you want me to stay at your house? And she said, well, because you've earned that. And I'd be like, okay, but like, why do you want me to stay at your house? And then I'm thinking, like, she's been like all over me, kind of, in a way, in a sexual kind of way. And I'm thinking, like, I was scared to stay at her house. And I'm like, well, like, what do you do with that? When the head of the organization says, come out early and stay at my house. And so, like, I was talking with my partner about it, and I go, like, what do I do? And she says, well, you're a big girl, you can handle yourself. Like, thanks. You're saying it's okay to go into the lion's den, but I just would get up early and leave, and then come back really late, kind of thing.
this group that started off as executive
Success programs.
ESP. That's it. That's it. I was
Yeah.
thinking, what does the S stand for? Sorry. This group, this training that started as Executive Success Program, ESP, that later changed its name to NXIVM. It was the it was like the brain child of a man called Keith Ranieri, who approached a woman called Nancy Salzman to help him execute this plan that he had around training people, offering people training, putting his ideas out into the world. That's my understanding of how ESP started. Would you say that that's accurate, or was there something a bit more to that?
Well, I think that he wanted Nancy Salzman because Nancy Salzman was a master trainer of master trainers in neurolinguistic programming. And then she was also an Ericksonian hypnotherapist. And so the 16-day training was nothing new. It was all stuff in neurolinguistic programming, really. And so it wasn't really even his idea. None of that stuff was new stuff. It was all just repackaged. And it was packaged in my opinion, it was packaged in a really good program. I mean, I think people that came through the 16-day training, a lot of people got a lot of really good things out of it. I got some good stuff out of it. And had people really just stuck to the training and not had intent to expunge things out of people like money, sex, come work for us and we're not going to pay you anything. I think people were fine with that. It's when they started to manipulate people to, be sexual partners with Keith, to come work for us for free, or, be to not make any money, those kinds of things are when they started to do manipulation, like, the family from Mexico, those kinds of things. That's when it started to become a weapon, or, when you wouldn't comply and then they would start to manipulate and abuse you. Like, I became non-compliant to a lot of things, and then they started to manipulate you. Or like when we met with them about the business aspect of it, they said, well, this is negotiable. Like, when I found out that there wasn't really a way to make money out of it and that you were losing money, and I went back to them and said, we need to renegotiate percentages. And they said, well, we're not going to do that. And really who was making the money from the centers was NXIVM, and the people that own centers were not making a lot of money. I was always robbing certain things from this part of the business to pay this part of the business, and was in a tremendous amount of debt, that kind of thing.
Was the core vision of the company when it first started, as you understood it when you came into contact with ESP in 2000?
Well, the thing was, it was called executive success programs, and what it was designed for when I went in was to help people to learn to be more successful in whatever endeavor that they had, whether that be, your business, whether that be personal, whether that be sports related, those kinds of things. And I saw a lot of people come for different reasons. Like, there was a man from Mexico. He was an amazing singer, and that's what he wanted to do, was to be a singer. Well, and they said, well, move from Mexico, and we'll help you, Vanguard will work with you on your singing skills. That never happened, and the guy, he just did slave labor kind of thing. He was always broke, and he worked on people's computers because he had those skills in computers. So they just used and abused him, in my opinion, that kind of stuff. And then, I saw people that, like, one couple that came in, they, in my opinion, they were happily married and they had a business. And then before you know it, they sold their business. They got a divorce, and stuff like that. And then he ended up, working for NXIVM. He became, in my opinion, he did criminal activity, for NXIVM, those kinds of things. And like take Claire Brofman, for example. She came in, she wanted to be an Olympic equestrian. She's a prime example. I saw Nancy work those girls over, to extract millions and millions and millions of dollars out of them. She stopped riding. She went to the Olympic trials. She didn't make it that year. What if she made it, if she would have continued riding for 4 more years? Maybe if she had a better coach than Keith Raniere. What did Keith Raniere know about riding horses? And then she
Who is this guy? Like, who is this man? Because he's at the center of everything to do with ESP and NXIVM. Who was he before this group came into existence?
Well, he's a really good con artist, is what he is.
I should say, what were you told or taught to believe about Keith Raniere when this group came into existence? Because who Keith Raniere really is and who everybody thought he was are most likely two very, very different things.
Two very, very different things. And well, and then when I went in, Google didn't even exist. So it was hard to look them up. But they had all kinds of accolades about him, smartest man, third top problem solver in the world. And then later I found out that it was like a card game, that he was good at figuring out this card game. It's like, what? And that he had an IQ of 240. Well, that was a take-home test through Mensa, and I heard that other people helped him take that take-home test kind of thing. And then I heard he was in the Guinness World Book of Records, and I kept saying, well, where's the book? And then I heard, oh, well, it's out of print. Well, like, wouldn't you keep one copy of it? That kind of thing. And then you heard all of these accolades, but none of them were provable. And then I heard he was a triple graduate from RPI, which is kind of like MIT, kind of thing. But then you found out that his grades were really poor and he didn't get 3. He didn't get 3 diplomas, those kinds of things. So he was a con artist. And then the thing with cults that you'll find is that you usually have the cult leader, and then you have a circle called the inner circle. And then what happens is that the inner circle will lie for the cult leader, and they back up the cult leader. And so then you have like these innocents that will walk in, and you have this manipulation that goes on with the inner circle, and they'll all back up each other's lies. And it's a well-oiled machine. It's kind of like, if you know anything about any kind, like take an engine, for example, like an 8-cylinder engine has to be, all the spark plugs have to be wired off of the distributor in order for that engine, for the cylinders all to go. One wire's out of place, the engine will misfire. So all those wires have to be wired correctly in order for the cylinders to all go at this, to fire like that. And so the inner circle all has to work correctly with each other. And so it's very well formulated. And so they all back up each other's lies.
So Keith Raniere has cultivated this environment with this inner circle one by one by one. And then the inner circle, they do his job for him when new people arrive into the group. And then before you know it, if you've watched Seduced or The Vow, there are these retreats that take place with hundreds of people who are all echoing those same sentiments that the inner circle, I suppose originally came from Keith into the inner circle, into the wider the wider participants of NXIVM, like a trickle-down effect.
Well, it started before NXIVM, because before that he had another company called Consumers Byline, or CBI. So he started that, and before that he started Well, it started when he was young. He did that in grade school. We've had people that went to grade school with him in high school and stuff like that. And then he went to RPI. So he practiced his skills when he was in college. And then he started a company called Consumers Byline. And so when he was in Consumers Byline, he was practicing all of his tricks there. And then part of a good foundation of his inner circle in ESP NXIVM came over from Consumers Byline. And in between Consumers Byline was a company called National Health Network. So when he was in Consumers Byline, he had like 27 attorney generals. And attorney generals are like the head of each state. They came after him and said, "You're running a pyramid scheme." And he got shut down. And then the New York State Attorney General said, "You, Pam Cafords, and Karen Unterreiner are barred from ever running anything that looks like a network marketing company in the state of New York." And so then what he did is he opened up National Health Network, but he couldn't be the figurehead of that. So he chose Tony Natale to run National Health Network. And so Tony was the figurehead of National Health Network because he couldn't be the head. And so Tony ran National Health Network, but that wasn't growing fast enough for him. They had a couple of health food networks, or a couple of health food stores that had little restaurants in them, and they sold vitamins. And so from Consumer Byline, he brought a group of people that were in CBI that were in that kind of became a network marketing kind of company. And so then he had the idea of this educational program that could grow quicker. And then he brought in Nancy Salzman from there. And so then they became partners, and then they started these classes. And so then he walked away from National Health Network, let Tony run that. And then they started executive success programs, but he couldn't be the figurehead of that because of this order from the New York State Attorney General. And then any asset he had, he hid in other people's names because he owed the state attorney general money, right? And so then he started that. He put Nancy as the owner because he couldn't own it, right? And so, but I don't know any of this because Google didn't exist.
No.
Right?
And it makes so much sense because Keith Raniere he's a malignant, traumatic narcissist and a horrific abuser and manipulator. It doesn't make sense for him to put other people in the top echelon with him. It's out of necessity that has happened. I don't know if ESP or NXIVM would have built the way that it did if he didn't get Nancy involved, but it makes sense that he needed a co-conspirator.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that was I don't know if that was Nancy's intention at first. I mean, everybody has their thoughts on that. I do wonder, if Keith Raniere always knew that his aim was to con people because he'd already been doing that before this was established.
I don't think he could help himself but to con people. Yeah, I think it's just in his nature to con people. I don't think that for him, I think it's a game. Like, how much can I get away with without being caught? I think eventually he thought he was going to get caught because he was so paranoid. What I found out, in my time in NXIVM, in my time after leaving, is he was always paranoid because Nancy would say, "We think our phones are being tapped." And I'd be like, "Well, what makes you think your phones are being tapped?" Or like one time I was at the very first V week, where they celebrated his birthday. It was only a weekend. It was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I went for a walk with Esther, at that time her name was Esther Chapone, but it's now Carlson. So we went for a walk, and we're walking down the road, and a car came up, and it was Pam Caford's and a couple other people. And she goes, "Have you seen a van?" And I said, "A van?" She said, "Yeah, like a blue van." And I said, "No." She goes, "Well, keep an eye out for it because they're not supposed to be here. They're spying on us." And I went, "What?" It's like, and there's only one road into this place and one road out. It was just like this Girl Scout camp or something like that. It wasn't at the big place that they normally have it, had it at. And I was like, "What?" She goes, "Yeah, they're spying." She's like, "They're spying on us." And I'm like, "Okay." It's kind of like whatever. And I'd only been in like 9 months at that point. It's kind of like
This
whatever.
if this is what Keith Raniere is telling the inner circle, though, and that's what the inner circle's telling everybody else, you've got that same trickle down effect of that information becoming widely accepted as the truth, uh, which is dangerous. We've seen how dangerous that can be, and this really did expand. So even though he couldn't put himself solely at the top, he had Nancy Solzman, and then they were building on these seminars, these evening sessions that turned into these intensives, and you were introduced to ESP at the time where these intensives were happening. So this would be at the Girl Scout camp early on. Uh, and what was your first 16-day experience like? Was it 16 days, the first one that you went to?
Yeah, and that was actually at the training facility that Keith and Nancy had.
Right.
Yeah, the Girl
So
Scout
16
camp was.
days, woof, that's a long
Yeah,
time for your first sort of introduction to
mhm,
the entire thing.
mhm.
And yeah, can you talk us through what that was like, what your experiences were like? You've talked about the sash and some of the things that you were told were customary, uh, uh, for ESP.
Right.
Did you ever find out the true reasoning behind things like this sash and taking the shoes off?
Yeah, well, what Nancy used to say was kind of the guardian at the gate, that if people had a reaction to that, and wanted to leave after that, is that they weren't really, meant to be in the program. It is because they caught on early that it was a cult. It's what I think, is they caught on early that it was a cult, and they really shouldn't be in the program anyways. And so if they wanted to leave, they already had their money because there was no refunds, and so they had their money already, and then they could just, bye bye, we don't want to deal with you. Kind of thing, where the rest of us just went, "Oh, that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, yeah, it's just like being in martial arts. Yeah, okay." No.
And were you able to recruit or bring along 3 people so that you would get your money back?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I actually brought in quite a few people. I had a training facility on the West Coast, so I brought in actually a lot of people, you know?
The setup where you get to attend for free if you bring a certain amount of people is kind of akin to a pyramid scheme or multi-level
Mhm.
marketing. And I know that NXIVM has been accused of using those same infrastructures. So would
Yeah.
you say that that is definitely what was happening?
Oh, yeah, and I kept saying, "How is this not network marketing?" You know? 'Cause they had this thing where if you wanted to get to, I think it was a two-stripe coach. If you wanted to get to two-stripe coach, you couldn't be attached to a network marketing company, because there were a lot of network marketers that came in, and they would be like, "Well, how's this not network marketing?" And they would try to explain how it wasn't network marketing, and I kept saying, "Well, this just seems like network marketing to me," because, you had to have, in order to get to your next stripe, you had to have a certain amount of growth and a certain amount of people enrolled into your in personally enrolled, and then you had to have a certain amount of people enrolled into your organization, and be like, "This just seems like network marketing to me," kind of thing. But because Keith had been, you know, um, disbarred from building anything that was network marketing like it, but because he wasn't a part, he didn't own any part of the company. Nancy could do anything she wanted with network marketing, but people kept saying, like, how is this not network marketing? And they would just like, psh, it's kind of like a Jedi mind trick. This is not network marketing. This is, like, this is not the network marketing company you seek, kind of thing, but they would never really answer that question. People would come up to me and say, well, how is this not network marketing? And I'd be like, I don't know, but that's, if you want to move up the straight path, you have to let that go, kind of thing. You either have to stay with the company you're with, or you can't go any farther in NXIVM.
How does ESP manage to fill up 16 days? That is such a long period of time. And when you're in an environment that where you're, you're kind of taking yourself away from day-to-day life, and you're in an enclosed, sealed system. I mean, what I'm just really interested in, like, how do you feel 16 days? Is every day different? Is it a lot of the same stuff? How long do the days last for? Is it
Mm-hmm.
like, is it very love bombing where you're given like beautiful food and there's people there that testify to the success that they've had using ESP's skill sets and toolkits, and what's the whole feel? Because you were in it for
Mm-hmm.
9 years, so this
Right.
really did, it got you, like
Right.
it did with so many others.
Right. Well, some people broke the 16 days up. They took maybe the first 5 days. They took the first 8 days, then they took the last 8 days. It always started on a Saturday. So it was filled in 3 weekends, and then the 2 weeks in between, kind of thing. And so, or then some people just took 2 days, 2 weeks off from work, that kind of thing. Um, and the days were long. It depends on really where you went to the training at. Like, if you came to my training center, I just kept the training really clean, and I taught the training, that kind of thing. If you went to Albany, it was more like they shoved, Keith and Nancy down your throat. They were constantly talking about prefect and vanguard, and that kind of thing. And to me, that made it more cult-like kind of thing, where I just wanted to train the training. And so there were it was taught in module form. So there were 5 different modules a day taught. And the modules were usually around 2 hours long. And so it was taught inductively. So like in a module, you would have, you would do an introduction to the module, and then you would break up into small breakout groups. And then a coach would take you through a series of questions based on what the module was. Like, say, if it was honesty and disclosure, they would take you through a series of questions about, like, what is honesty? What's disclosure? Can you have honesty without disclosure, those kinds of things. And then the group would get to answer those questions. And then you would come back, and then you would show a video of Nancy going over those set of questions, which now I realize Nancy was implanting NXIVM's ideas of what those concepts were, kind of thing. And then who was ever had training that would just kind of go through that and let people that were in those breakout groups talk about the concepts. And then you'd go over the next section, so there was a lot of getting up, moving around, those kinds of things. And then when people came in the morning, depending on where you went to your intensive, you usually got a light breakfast, like, oatmeal, bagels, those kinds of things. And it was usually pretty healthy food. And then you got a snack, in the middle of the morning. And then you got lunch, lunch was on your own. And then same thing when you came back in the afternoon, there was an afternoon snack, and then dinner, was provided. I never let my people starve when they came. A lot of these times they would say, oh, you got, you're sleep deprived and stuff like that. And so I always tried to make sure my intensives wrapped up at 9 at night, so that, you weren't going till 11, 12 o'clock at night, those kinds of things. So and I always try to make sure my people just had a really good experience, and try to, um, you know, decultivate anything, like I wasn't shoving Keith down people's throats all day long. When I would go to intensives back in Albany, like some trainers, every other word out of their mouth would be Vanguard. And I'd be like, oh God, you guys make this you make it sound like such a cult. Like, it's just like, you should knock it off.
You talked about your lead up to your first ESP experience and how you were somebody with a psychology master's or a master's in psychology, and somebody that was counseling and helping people heal emotional wounds, and also to help people uh, with their help them with their business skills as well. So did
Mhm.
you feel like you had found that gap that you were looking for when you originally went over to ESP in the first place? You said there was a gap missing in your work. Did you feel like this was going to fill that void?
Well, at first I really liked it, but I didn't think it would. When I first went in, I didn't think it would take over my time at my clinic, but at some point, it got to the point where, I had to make a choice between what I was doing because it became time consuming to where I eventually had to walk away from my clinic, you know? And, I still did, massage on the side, but then it just got, when I eventually opened up my center, I just didn't have time I turned over my practice to a couple other people that were in my clinic. And then we opened up the training facility. And then it just, um, I kind of walked away from what I had originally built, which, was regretful at that point, when I look back on it. But, you can't go back and go like, oh my gosh, I should have stayed with that because, it's kind of I don't know if you ever saw the movie Sliding Doors. You can't go back and go like, "Oh, I went through that door, and if I woulda gone through that door, my life would have been totally different," because there is no going back. But eventually, um, you know, NXIVM took over what I had originally done, so it wasn't like, I could intermix the 2
Right.
things. So, it just became time consuming. And there was a point in my life where I thought that I would do ESP for the rest of my life until I found out I started to get red flags, and I started to do some research. I did the ultimate betrayal to ESP as I went to the Rick Ross website, you know, and, I started doing some research, and I was appalled appalled, and then I went to Nancy, and I told her, I said, "Gosh, I went to the Rick Ross website, and I have some questions for you," and, oh my god, if her head coulda spun around and puked green shit all over me, that woulda happened, because that was, like, the ultimate betrayal, that any member of NXIVM could have ever done is gone to Rick Ross because he was, like, the ultimate enemy. They were in a lawsuit with him and stuff, and she said, "You have changed your internal representation of Vanguard forever." It's kinda like, and I said, "Well, I just, there's things happening that I don't understand why you guys do it, and I've asked so many questions, but you just deflect them." I said, "You're like Wonder Woman, and I ask a question and you just go, "Ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching." And I said, "And you won't be honest with me." I said, "You borrow money you can't repay, and you're in these lawsuits that I don't understand why you're suing people. You just make it worse for the company, and you treat people like shit, and you don't pay people properly, and like, people come in happily married and then they end up getting divorced, and I just don't understand why you're doing this. You don't have to do it, and like, so, and I said, I'm starting to have red flags. And that was the day I started nailing my coffin in NXIVM shut, and they just started treating me poorly after that. But, and I don't know if you read any of Yanya Lollige's books, but she talks about how, when you're in a cult, you have this shelf behind you and you start to put your red flags on it, and then at some point it collapses. And at that point, my shelf hadn't collapsed, but I started asking, my shelf was getting full. And then one time I went back to Albany, and I got summons to Nancy's house. I got summons to Nancy's house a lot. Well, one, I was a massage therapist, and she always wanted me to give her a massage, and she was supposed to pay me for them, but I never got paid. So, it's kind of like, oh, yeah, we'll write you a check, or we'll take it off, some of the money you owe us for trainings and stuff like that. And, but I still never ever got paid. But I got summons to her house, and she was really agitated. And so when people are really agitated around me, I'm trained professionally on that because I worked in crisis intervention at a college for 5 years. So, I would always try to get her unagitated, because if I couldn't get her unagitated, then I was always in for a big ass chewing, because whatever she was agitated over became my fault at some point, So I was trying to get her unagitated, and she was sitting in a chair and I was sitting across from her. It was in her EM room, and she was just kind of like had her head down like this, and she was just like, and I said, look, just like, what's going on, you can talk to me and blah blah blah. And that's when she said, we're bringing cash across the border from Mexico. And I said, what? And she said, well, most of the Mexicans pay in cash. And I said, well, why doesn't Edgar just put it in his bank account? Now, Edgar Boone was the head of Mexico. He was the top tier. And Mexico was NXIVM's cash cow. I mean, they made the most money out of any organization in NXIVM. And so I knew it was a lot of money. And I said, well, why doesn't Edgar just put it in his account and just wire it up here? And she goes, well, because we're not going to pay taxes on it. And so, inside I'm just going like, oh my God. Well, actually, I said the F word, I'm just like, what? And she said, yeah, we're going to bring it across the border. We're not going to pay cash taxes on it. So I'm thinking like, okay, that's tax evasion and that's money laundering. But I don't want to let her know that I know what they're doing. Right. So inside I'm a mess, but outside I'm just trying to be calm, cool, like, oh, he just told me of 2 major crimes, but I'm not going to let you know that I'm upset about this. Okay, I'll let you know that borrowing money from students is not good and sleeping with students is not good, but I'm not going to let you know that I'm onto this. And I said, oh, yeah, okay. And then she says, but we're bringing it across in 10 million or $10,000 increments because that's legal. And I'm thinking like, oh, now you're trying to justify to me that that's legal. Okay. And I said, oh, well, that's good. So I'm just trying to agree with her at this point, right? You just told me 2 major crimes, but now you're trying to justify. I'm like, oh, okay, that's good. Oh, that's smart. And she said, yeah, when we go to Mexico to train, the trainers are bringing it back in $10 million or $10,000 increments. And then when the students from Mexico come up, the staff and students come up from Mexico, if they're fine with bringing the $10,000 across, they're bringing it over. And I'm like, oh, well, that's a good idea. But inside I'm just freaking out, that she's telling me this. And I'm like, oh, well, that's a good idea. And and then she realizes what she's done, right? She just told a person that they can't get to not pay their taxes, and a person that they can't get to, like, step over the ethical, moral, criminal line for them, what she's said. And then she goes, well, what are you going to do with this information? And I'm like, what? I said, nothing. Look, what can I do with this information? I said, gosh, if I went anywhere and said anything to anybody about it, I said it would just be my word against yours anyways. like, what can I do with it? And I'm thinking, like, I'm supposed to get on a plane to go back home tomorrow morning. And like, are they going to let me get on that plane? It's like, am I going to end up in a cornfield in Iowa somewhere? It's like, I was scared to death.
Well, it's really wild to think about your first introduction to ESP up to this point here, where you're realizing that you're going to have to make a break from NXIVM somehow, despite this um mounting debt that you are in
Mhm.
from NXIVM themselves shifting the goalposts and introducing these, oh, you just have to jump through this hoop, and then you just have to jump through this hoop, and you just have to, if you want to start earning money back to pay off this debt, you just have to add a little bit more debt and a little bit more debt. And that is really where this starts to feel like Scientology, where you have the OT levels where, oh, to get to this next stage, you just have to understand this, and then you just have to understand this, and OT level 6, 7, 8, 9 that get progressively more expensive.
Mhm.
And also what you said about how you went looking for something to fill a gap to supplement what you already were working with, what already existed, was then completely pushed out of your life, and NXIVM became the front and center of everything. That's not giving people skills to take back into their everyday lives. That's making their everyday lives disappear and NXIVM become their world, their everything, their universe.
Right.
Um, which is a really complicated thing to try and unpack, because you had a whole practice. And I wonder if somebody that has a master's in psychology at any point realizes the tactics that are being used against them, or is it so nuanced that even somebody that's qualified to think in a way that most people might not think doesn't recognize them. And
Yeah.
it really does go against the stereotype of the type of person that joins a cult, because you're an educated person working as a counselor at the point you're introduced to ESP. So I've just given us loads to talk about. Sorry,
Yeah.
maybe we should start with how the goalposts were always shifting. I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to say about that and the links to Scientology.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. What yeah, I think that I think it's typical in any cult that is organized in such a structure that they constantly are moving, and I think it depends on where you're at in the cult in regards to popularity. Like, they said they had a structure for um promotions. And here's this organization that says that they're ethical in regards to like things like promotions and stuff like that, but there were people that were promoted that weren't qualified to be promoted, you know that kind of thing. And so, like, an example of that is Keith had a relationship with Mariana Fernandez, and that's the woman that eventually had his baby, that he wanted to have his baby, you know and like, she constantly got promotions that she was never qualified to have the promotion, and that would piss people off, that kind of thing. And then there were other people who got promoted that weren't qualified to get their promotions, and they would get promoted and they'd be like, I'm not really qualified to get a promotion. And then you take somebody like me, that I was qualified to get my promotion from proctor to senior proctor for a long time. And uh, like, I built the Vancouver, BC area, and that would have been my satellite center, which I would have got 10% of that satellite center. Um, and we were waiting for me to get to green so that we could open up Vancouver. but yet they would never promote me to senior proctor. And probably because, one, I was defiant, and two, they didn't want me to satellite that center because I was too defiant. And the other thing is that at that point, they were looking for what I call the beautiful people to be the leaders of NXIVM. The rich, the famous, the more artistic kind of people. They wanted the actors, the Richard Bransons of the world, that kind of thing. They didn't want somebody who was like a working class, uh, lesbian type of person to be a center owner, those kinds of things.
The Tom Cruise of people.
Yeah, the Tom Cruise kind of person to, so, they would much prefer Sarah Edmondson to be the head of the Vancouver Center, which she would have been, but I would have still been the satellite owner of that center, kind of thing. And so, plus I was too defiant, I would say, like, why are you doing this? Kind of thing. They, strategically started to put boulders in my way to prevent certain things to happen. It's almost kind of like they were pushing me out the door, kind of thing. And so, but I think that's typical in cults. It's like, there's certain people that they want to push out, but they don't want us to just say, hey, we're kicking you out, kind of thing. They'll just put boulders in the way, kind of thing.
So there's a dangling carrot of you becoming senior proctor and having a chance to earn 10% of a satellite center, which would go towards paying back the debt that you are in at this point through the financial coercion of Nancy and Keith Ranieri. Again, it's such a difficult thing to, like, you're in debt because you're trying to reach this senior status that you can't get to because the group's not letting you, and they're the ones that are charging you for these courses that are putting you in more debt so that you can get out of debt by becoming senior proctor at a satellite center. So it's a really convoluted thing to understand, isn't it? And I recall someone saying to me that in Scientology, if you look at Dianetics in its core principles, it's kind of like pretty general advice, guidance, and life rules that can be quite helpful. But when you add all this extra stuff on top of it, that's, like the promise of enlightenment or whatever it is at the end of the rainbow, or the bridge to total freedom, whichever expression you
Right,
want to
right,
use.
right.
It's no longer just basic principles. It's destructive and toxic in nature. So you start off in ESP thinking, wow, this is really good stuff, this could really help my practice. But as with people that live by Dianetics, it becomes a dependency thing. They can't live life without these teachings. And so it feels very similar in that way as well. What started off as something that could be applied to your current life and seemed quite simple and helpful, then became something that you were entirely dependent on because of the community that you'd been a part of for 9 years, because of the money that you'd put into it. And then it becomes a whole thing that's not just reading a book and saying, wow, that's really helpful, I could just apply that to my everyday life.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that, yeah. And they did the same thing with me as becoming a head trainer. They did the same thing with me in regards to becoming like a EMP practitioner, different streams of income that I worked towards coming, like I became a head trainer, then they took it away from me, those kinds of things. Is that, and I think that that's really true, is that, you know, a, a lot of people that I knew came and they came to my center, they took a 16-day, and maybe they joined in a program that's called Ethos, and where you can come and take classes when you want, and then you get weekly coaching, stuff like that. And they say, hey, I'm really glad I took that, and I'm sorry what happened to you, kind of thing. And they talk about, yeah, I still use those tools that I learned, but they never got involved in the cult of NXIVM. They came and they got the tools, then they left. And when you hear like Nancy in the Vow 2, where she talks about, all these people came through and they got, they got good results. Those are the people that probably got the good results. The people that came and they took the program and they left without getting involved in the cult of NXIVM. The people that got involved in the cult of NXIVM are the ones that got, financially, they got damaged and they got abused because they got involved in the cult. And because when they didn't jump to Nancy and Keith barking at them and doing what Nancy and Keith wanted them to do, then they got abused. Like when I asked questions, then I would get abused around that. I didn't do what they wanted me to do. Like they would want me to come back to level 2 trainings, and I'd say, I can't afford that. I'm not going to go into any more debt. Then I would get abused. When I finally started putting my foot down.
What how would that abuse manifest itself in your kind of peer circle within Nexium?
Oh, well, then people would come, to give me feedback. They would start saying things to me that weren't true about me, those kinds of things. Like Nancy would EM me, and then she was trying to implant things in me that weren't true about me, those kinds of things. Or like, I would get summons to her house when I was back there, and it would be like this big screaming match, a lot of verbal abuse, that kind of thing. And then she would send sentinels out after me, that kind of thing. So different members of the inner circle would come at me, or I'd get phone calls, from different people, saying different things about me. And then she started to infiltrate and poison my well out here, of people that were my friends. A lot of my friends started to like, you know, stop being my friends and stuff like that because, all of a sudden I had anger issues, or I was, somehow I had changed, and I'm like, I'm still me, and I've had people that, when I shut down my center, they called to give me feedback about that. And then now that when when NXIVM burnt to the ground, those people have called me and come back and said, gosh, I'm really sorry for how I treated you when you left, kind of thing. And I'm like, well, okay, you know, and stuff. And some of those people I've been able to regain friendships with, kind of thing, because they stayed with NXIVM after I closed my center, and so some of those people we've been able to re-garnish our friendship because they realized what I was doing and how they reacted to the inner circle getting to them, kind of thing, and stuff like that.
So feedback is a Nexium term that
Mm-hmm.
is positioned to be something that you receive as a benefit to you. Like, I'm going to give you feedback here. It's a
Right.
gift. It's going
Yeah.
to help you grow
Yeah.
on your journey in Nexium, when actually it's kind of more like shaming, public shaming, humiliating.
Yeah.
So you've used a few other words as well. V week. Don't tell me that that stands for Vanguard Week.
Yes. Yeah, it was a celebration for his birthday, and it was usually 10 days long. And at first it was actually pretty fun because it was in the um northern New York, in the up in the mountains kind of thing. It was this big YMCA camp. And at first it was fun, you go there and it was like kind of like a vacation, and you got a vacation kind of thing. And they had all kinds of activities. It was on this big lake, kind of thing. So you could kayak, or, sailboat and stuff like that, or, rent a boat and go water skiing and stuff like that, and do archery and all kinds of things. And they put on plays, like I think we put on Sweeney Todd, and they would bring in entertainment and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden it changed. And then they started having these work groups, and I'd be like, oh my God, I don't want to do this. I work all year long, and then you put on this thing that we have to go to because, it's a company getaway and we have to celebrate Keith's birthday. And now you want us to do these work groups, like writing work groups, and you want us to go to modules. And like, I teach these modules all year long. I don't want to go to a stupid module. So I started skipping that kind of stuff,
Would you have
and
to pay for V Week, even though it's
oh,
just to
yeah.
participate in classes that you teach? You
Well,
have to pay.
it was more paying for your lodging,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Okay.
So, and then lodgings and meals and stuff, but, so kind of thing. But I would start to skip I would start skipping the modules, and I'd start skipping like you had to sign up for some kind of like writer's workshop or something like that. I mean, I'd skip those, and then Nancy would catch me and she'd be like, why aren't you at the workshop? And I'd be like, because, it's like, I don't want to do any of those. And then I'd get feedback about like not participating and stuff. But I'd usually sign up for the play, because the plays were usually a musical and stuff. So I'd sign up for the play to be a part of the play, because those were fun for me to do. And then you could get out of the other stuff that you didn't want to do, kind of thing.
Well, that's creating that community aspect of life within NXIVM that is an extra added layer of why it's so difficult or almost impossible to just walk away from
Right.
everything. We've already talked about the debt and the promise of being able to get out of that debt once you reach a certain level within the group. And then you are being manipulated. You're having these minions deployed to give you feedback. You're subjected to the elements of coercive control in terms of keeping you away from your family and loved ones,
Oh, they did.
jeopardizing
Yeah, they weren't successful at that because
or
I was so far
attempting to
away. Yeah.
jeopardize your
Yeah.
relationships with people by telling them things about you that aren't true.
Yeah. My
Uh,
friends. Yeah.
attempting to coerce you into sexual acts, I
Yes. Oh my
assume, on
God.
Nancy's part that you're not interested in. And then on top of that, you've got this beautiful community where you get to do plays and go kayaking, and um that's the really difficult thing, because then you've got these positive experiences that you don't want to miss out on. If you walk away, then you're no longer going to have access to this really wonderful community of
No.
amazing people that is just being uh r- unfortunately
Yeah.
infiltrated by narcissists that are out for personal gain. um so I
Yeah.
can see what people mean when they say Nexium started out as one thing and turned into something completely different.
Yeah. They did separate me from some of my friends out here. They were unsuccessful at separating me from my family. And the saving grace in a lot of ways for me is I was so far away from Albany, you know, and they didn't try to recruit me to go to Albany, but they did try to recruit my partner. And they were unsuccessful about doing that. And I would ask Nancy periodically, I would be like, why are you trying to get my partner? Which, I try to keep my partner out of these things because there's been a request to do that. So I'm just going to talk about my partner.
Mm-hmm.
But and she said, well, some people need to be in Albany, but not everybody. And I'd be like, well, that's not going to happen. We're a team, and that's not going to happen. But they would, and they did try several times to break us up, which I think is a cult tactic, that kind of thing. But they were unsuccessful at doing that. But they did try to, like, anytime I would go to visit my dad, who lived in another state, they would always call me, and say, you know, um, I would get a call from like Nancy's assistant and say, you really need to take a look at your breach of, like why you're vacationing, And I'd be like, well, fuck you guys. Yeah, that would be my response.
A breach is another term for doing something that the leadership don't agree with.
Right. Yeah. You need to take a look at your breach. It is so funny because I'd be like, well, fuck you guys, you know? Yeah, I'm gonna visit my family. You know, you're not gonna separate me from my I said, that sounds like a cult. Yeah, that's what would be my response. You guys sound like a cult now that you're trying to separate me from my family. Well, that's not what we're doing, but you have things that you should be doing besides taking time to visit your family. And I'd say, well, my center is successfully working. I have more etho students than you guys do. So when you get the number of etho students that I do, then you can tell me what to do. And I would just throw it back in their face.
The the operation in Albany, that was the HQ of NXIVM.
Mm-hmm.
So Albany is really where the secret inner circle of NXIVM, the DOS aspect of NXIVM was really carried out in Albany.
Right. Yeah.
So there's a whole story around DOS, around the horrific things that happened, that I think people can really understand the depravity of Keith Raniere by watching The Vow Season 1, The Vow Season 2, Seduced, and really getting an understanding of the picture from the aerial view right down into DOS, who was involved in DOS, what things happened in DOS. But for the sake of this interview, we're really just going to stick to your story, Susan. And I wondered if your psychology training ever kicked in at any point, and had you kind of putting things together, and if that played a part in you deciding to walk away.
Well, I think my red flags, that's where I became observant of certain things going on. Like, when in 2003, there was a student that was in a training up in Alaska. It was her second training. And she started to deteriorate in the training. And there's still a lot of stuff we'll never know about that. Um, and instead of calling in the mental health therapist, or which I would have done based on my training at the college, or getting her psychological help, they just kicked her out of the training and took her home. And then there was supposedly a suicide note from her. There's a documentary called Lost Women in NXIVM that I was involved in, and we don't know. There's a bunch of different theories out there of what happened to her. When I heard about her death, I was told by Nancy Salzman that she had committed suicide, which I was shocked about because I was at her first 5-day of her first intensive. And then I saw her when we were both in Albany, New York. I was shocked that she committed suicide. NXIVM's reaction when a student started to deteriorate in trainings was to just say that they were trying to seek attention, kind of thing, where that's not always the case. Sometimes when people go through any kind of trainings like that, they're stuff comes up for them for whatever reason. And you don't just send a person home like that. Or another thing that they did was they would take them to a upper member's house, and then they would get a prescription drug, and then minister that prescription drug, like an anti-anxiety drug or something, and administer that to the student and kind of let them calm down, where you should bring in a mental health professional. But they didn't want to do that because they thought it would reflect badly on their training. That was a red flag for me. Like, none of you guys are trained on how to deal with somebody that's starting to deteriorate in training. And so, and I would always talk to them, like, none of you guys are really qualified on how to deal with this. And I think part of it is that they sometimes would push people in the wrong direction. This is a self-help kind of program. It's like, you don't push people psychologically. That's not what this program is designed to do. None of you guys are therapists. I wouldn't do it in a training, because that's not what the course of the training is designed to do. And so, but again, I think it's because of that slow drip that happens in a training like that. It's like you can't see everything that there is designed to do. And a lot of times when people watch a documentary like The Vow and stuff like that, be like, well, how can you not see this? Well, it's like you're looking at the outside in, you're seeing all the bad shit. Nobody would join NXIVM if they just watched The Vow and said, hey, do you want to sign up? Yeah, everybody'd be like, like, of course I don't want to sign up, kind of thing. But you don't see it from the time when you walk into a beginning seminar, kind of thing.
Each season is sort of like 6 hours or so. We're talking about 9 years of your life.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
important to put those things into perspective as well.
Right.
And you've joined at a time where ESP is picking up traction, and you've mentioned that by the time you're hearing about illegal activity, there's centers all over the place. There's centers in Alaska, there's centers in Mexico. So you've really been a part of NXIVM as it's expanded and grown and become almost like a household name. You've mentioned the Bronfman sisters, who are the daughters of Edgar Bronfman, who is
Well, he was the owner of Seagram's Seven, but they had sold it by then, and then he was the head of the World Jewish congregation. I mean, they were big business people, and so I mean, he was internationally well respected. And so, you know, in the Brockman family is, I mean, they're just internationally well known and stuff. And so, you know, and so, after I heard about the illegal activity, I knew I had to leave, because otherwise then I'm just complicit to that illegal activity kind of thing. And so I started setting my plans in motion to leave at that time, because I wasn't going to be a part of a criminal activity. I mean, that was the red flag that went up on my shelf that collapsed it, kind of thing. It's like, I'm out of here. And at that time, Jeunesse was just a weekend workshop, and it was, when I took the weekend workshop, I went to Nancy and I said, what is this caveman stuff? You're talking about men hitting women in the head and dragging them back in the cave. Men can be non-monogamous. The whole training was that men did not have the ability to be monogamous, kind of thing. And I'm like, what are you trying to, and it was all a setup for that, it was a justification why Keith could not be with one woman, really, is what the whole setup was for that.
so at this point, you've seen NXIVM expand. You've seen the injection of the cash flow from the Bronfman sisters really allow the enterprise to grow into its own. And at this point, there are multiple different workshops that exist with multiple different levels. And then what does Jeunesse stand for?
Well, it was a women's group at that time, It doesn't really stand for anything. It was just a women's movement. It was supposed to be for women only. And at that time, they had a weekend workshop, and then they had women's groups, and it could be over anything, like, and, some women got together and they had reading groups, and some women had knitting groups, and some women, and I just couldn't see me being involved in it in any way. And I just told Nancy, I don't want any part of this. I said, I think it's very misogynistic, and you're trying to teach women that it's okay for men to be non-monogamous. And I said, I don't agree with that, and I just don't want any part of it. And I'm personally not gonna be involved in it. But great. I said, I'm gonna just stick to the 16-day training, and I don't want any part of it.
And the point in which Nancy tells you about the money laundering and the tax evasion, she's already been trying to uh be involved with you sexually or
Oh, that happened.
romantically.
Well, that happened early on. That was in my first year,
Oh,
you know.
okay.
Yeah, that happened in my first year, and then that didn't really go anywhere. I think she realized that, I wasn't going to fall for that trick, you know.
So when you said that, when you mentioned that you were planning on your departure from Nexium, what was your thought process like, and what measures did you put in place so that you could do that?
Well, I came home after that happened, and I didn't tell anybody about it. I mean, I didn't even tell my partner about it because I didn't want to involve anybody in that knowledge. But I called my coach. Well, I told Kim that I had to close the center. I said, I'm done. I said, I have to leave. But I had things in Albany that I had to close up because I was in a partnership in a house back there, and I had a I had a car back there, and I had household. I had stuff back there, because I flew in sometimes twice a month back there. So I had to things I had to close down back there. But so I called my coach, and I said, I'm gonna leave Nexium. I said, I'm done. And my coach at the time was Barbara Boucher, and there was a lot of stuff going around about her, like Keith wasn't talking to her, and she was kind of on the outs with Nexium herself. And I said, I'm going to leave Nexium, and I said, I'm going to shut down my training facility. And I said, I know it's going to create a lot of havoc. And I said, but I need for you to keep this quiet. I said, I don't want you to go to any of the leadership and tell them that. I said, I'm going to try to leave quietly. And she said, okay. She said, are you going to come back at that time, the Dalai Lama had planned to have come back for a month or a week, and he was going to work with Nexium for a week, but he had canceled that. He had heard some bad things about Nexium at the time, and he canceled that. So Nexium had planned this week-long event to just do workshops and stuff like that. And she said, are you still going to come back for the non-Dalai Lama event, is what people were going to call it? And I said, well, I bought tickets to come back for that. And that's when I was going to come back and shut everything down. And I said, but I'm not going to go to the NXIVM event. So she said, well, why don't you just come back and let's talk? And I said, don't try to talk me into staying. I said, I can't tell you why I'm leaving. I'm just leaving. And she said, well, I have some concerns too. And so she said, why don't you just come back and we'll talk? She said, I have a group of women back here that have some concerns too. And she said, is your partner coming back too? And I said, yeah, we're going to both come back and close up our stuff. And so we did. She said, why don't you just stay with me? So that's when a group of us got together and we shared all of our concerns. And so,
Wow.
yeah,
What was that
it's,
like?
it was actually, it was actually, everything they told me is stuff I had expected with Keith and his sex life. And I suspected Barbara had a sexual relationship with Keith, which she told me she did. And the reason that Keith wasn't talking to her is because Barbara broke up with him. And that's why he wasn't talking to her. And then
Did that mean that others weren't talking to her by extension because
yep,
of his right?
yeah. And then another woman told me that she had been approached to have a sexual relationship with Keith, but she wasn't interested in that. And she said Pam Kayfreds did the same conversation with her that she did with me about Nancy. And I went, oh my God, that was the same setup that Pam did with me with Nancy. And they said, what? And I said, that's the same. Like, Keith is lonely. He's the vanguard. He needs friends, And then Keith did the walk with Pam, or with this woman, and said, if we're to have a sexual relationship, you can't share it with anybody because I'm the vanguard. And I said, oh my God, that's the same thing Nancy said to me.
So when Nancy Solzman says in The Vow season 2 that she kind of had an idea that Keith Raniere was sleeping with people, but also didn't really know, she absolutely knew because she was using the same script that he was using.
Nancy knew every single woman because Nancy EM'd all of them, which in Scientology is what do they call it in Scientology when they work with people? Well, it's like a counseling session. That's what an exploration of meaning is.
Because it's got its own like acronym as well, hasn't it, in Scientology, which is why everybody always compares them to.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing. So it's
Me
auditing,
meter. Yeah, auditing,
an
that's it.
auditing. Yeah. So like, yeah, when they so an EM is just like an auditing session in Scientology. So yeah, Nancy would EM all the women because when Keith started sleeping with women, they believed he was monogamous with them only. And then when they eventually found out that he was sleeping with a group of women, then they, of course, would have a reaction. Who wouldn't, right? And so, and then Nancy was usually called in to EM them. Nancy, Lauren, Karen were called in to work with them. Like, well, why do you need to own him? Isn't it just like playing tennis with somebody else? Those kinds of things. And so, yeah, when this woman told me about her experience, I said, "Oh my God, that was the same setup Pam did with me with Nancy." And then Nancy made her advances, and I don't think Nancy's a lesbian, and I personally don't think she was really attracted to me. I think it was probably either an assignment from Keith to get collateral on me, or to get my partner to break up with me over it, or that kind of thing. But um, no, I just don't cheat. I'm not a cheater, kind of thing.
So so women are explicitly told to accept that Keith will be with multiple women, but these women are never allowed to be with anybody else. Otherwise,
Correct.
they or even on their own. It's either Keith or nothing and nobody, or total shunning from Keith Raniere and everybody that he's involved with.
Right. Well, it's like the woman who was locked in the room for 2 years, that they talk about in trial, Danny. She was locked in that room because she kissed another man. That was the main reason she was put in that room. But her parents were told that she stole money. And she did take the money, but she put all of it back. She felt guilty about it, and so she put it back, and then she told Keith about it. Well, Keith made that what was a horrible thing, that she even took the money, even though she was being paid slave labor, that kind of thing. And Keith went back on his promise that he was supposed to, work with her, and she turned down a full ride scholarship, all this kind of stuff. And so there was no understanding on his part, in regards to all the promises he broke to her and stuff like that. But he told her parents that she was like this horrible person, and if she didn't come around, that she was going to be, like a psychopath kind of thing. And so, she kissed this guy that she was attracted to, and so he locks her in this room for 2 years, takes away all of her papers, her birth certificate, her passport, her visa, and stuff like that. And people were like, well, why didn't she just walk out? She wasn't locked in the room. Well, like, where was she supposed to go? She had no way to get back to Mexico. It's like,
And her entire family are involved with Keith Raniere at this point and have been subjected to his most strenuous manipulations.
right. Yeah. Her parents are brainwashed to keep her in the room, and, they're dropping off food at her door. And, it's just like, oh my God. It's like, well, yeah, she could have walked out, but where's she supposed to go?
Included in the kind of keeping women prisoner is the branding, which is well documented. Some women was inside DOS, which is a sort of like an inner circle of NXIVM that was super secret, and women were, it's like a master and slave situation with Keith
Mm-hmm.
Raniere as the master, and he would instruct women to do awful things, but then sometimes instruct women to instruct some of the other women to do awful things as well, making them complicit in his depravity, which included branding women, collecting collateral on women, uh, locking women in rooms, enforcing
Right.
terminations of pregnancy. So when we talk about like the really horrific stuff that happened in NXIVM, this is kind of what's referenced. But it's so important to discuss your story as well, Susan, and how DOS was able to happen from you kind of like, from joining in 2000 up to this point where you're sitting in this room with all of these women who are talking about their experiences uh inside NXIVM with Nancy Salzman and Keith Raniere, and you're all saying the same thing. I don't know that that happens very often in groups, because it's the consequences of leadership finding out that you've all had this conversation. It could mean for some women being locked in a room for 2 years, of
Right.
having
Well,
everything taken away from them.
we met, and then it was, I had already decided I was going to leave. And well, we met, and then Barbara decided to bring some people in and tell them what, all that we had discovered and stuff. And I did disclose to those women that what Nancy had told me about the money laundering and the tax evasion. And so we brought some people in and explained to them what was going on. And it was amazing the number of people that stayed after we disclosed to them what was going on. And then Barbara decided to see if Keith would meet with us after that. And so he agreed. He met with us for 3 days, and he allowed me to video it, which I was really surprised he allowed me to video it. And so on day 1, 9 of us met with him. And then we came back to Barbara's house, and then we watched the video. And then on day 2, only 4 of us met with him. And during the whole time, it was just one manipulation after another, one justification after another. And at the end of day 2, I had a complete total meltdown. It was like everything, it was kind of like the floodgates of everything I experienced in NXIVM kind of just opened up. And it was just like, it was just kind of like, it was like all the betrayals that ever happened just kind of flashed before my face. Kind of, you know, they say that when you die, everything in your life flashes before your face. It was like the death of NXIVM happened to me. And everything I experienced flashed before my face. And I sobbed like a little baby. And I knew there was no going back ever for me. And so I didn't go back the 3rd day. But my partner took the camera and filmed the 3rd day. And it was just my partner and Barbara that went back that day. And the thing was just to say, we're done. We're leaving. And so that night, Barbara said, excuse me. She just said, let's write a resignation letter. And so Barbara thought that they would pay us what they owed us. And I fought for a long time about that. I said, they're not going to pay us anything. And she said, oh no, they'll pay us, because she thought that they would pay us. And I said, I don't think they'll pay us. I mean, why would they? We're leaving, and that, I don't think they will. But she said, well, let's try. And so usually when you have a book of business, they'll pay, like an insurance company. Like if I'm an insurance company and I have a book of business, I have a right to sell that book of business back. And as a center owner and a field trainer, I had a right to sell that book of business back. And so I asked for the value of what my book of business would have been for 5 years. And so I asked for that value. And then I had commissions that were still owed to me. And then Barbara had loaned Keith $2 million to pay off of commodities, almost $2 million. And then other people had commissions. So we added that all up. And we added it into our resignation letter. And then we had said that if they paid that to us, that we would walk away quietly. But if they didn't want to pay us that, then we would go to the press and say that we resigned. Well, they took that as extortion and said that they were going to go to the DA and get us arrested. Well, so then Barbara hired her own attorney, and then I had enough credit left on a credit card that I hired the 7 rest of us an attorney. So we showed the letters to our attorneys, and they all laughed and said, "Oh, this is an extortion. You're just saying that you'll walk away quietly, versus if they don't want to pay, you'll go to the press and talk about your leaving." When 9 women walk away from a cult, that's something to be said, and they all do it at once. And so they went to the DA, but the DA just said the same thing, like, "Well, this is an extortion," kind of thing. But then I sent out a letter to all of the people in my organization out here that were center members, and said that I was closing the center down. And then I called 2 separate people, a couple that were in my center, and then a woman. And I called them and I said to the couple, I said, "Can you go to the center and change all the locks?" And to the other person, I said, "Can you go to the center and remove all the computers?" I said, "I can't tell you what's going on. Just, can you do this for me?" Because I was afraid that they would have somebody that was next and would have one of their people here go and take the computers and then take everything and then say I sold it, And so they said, "Okay." And so I said, "You have to go now," And so the couple did that, and then the other person came and got the computers, and then I got a text message from this woman saying, "Hey, you've been gone for a little while. I'm going to go down and check on this center." And I didn't know what her intent was. I didn't know if anybody called her and said, "Hey, can you go grab the computers," or whatever. And so I on my phone texting them, and I said, "So and so's on their way down. Can you guys get out of there?" Because I didn't want her pulling in as they were trying to leave or anything. And so they hurried up and got everything out of there. And then I got a text message from the person who was coming to check on the center. She said, "Hey, my keys won't work in the door. Do you know what's going on?" I said, "Oh, gosh, I don't know what's going on, but I'll be home in a couple of days, and I'll check on everything." But I was so afraid that they would, have somebody come in and take that stuff and then say I stole it, kind of stuff. But all that stuff, the videotapes and the notes and stuff like that didn't belong to me, but the computers were mine, kind of stuff. But it had their documentation stuff on it that belonged to them. And then I tried to get their materials back to them. I have, like, I don't know, 13 pages of emails between myself and their attorneys trying to get their materials back to them. And they just jerked me around. And then when they took me to court, they said I refused to give their materials back to them, and then, I had to show the judge, like, "Well, I haven't refused. I've just been unable to get them back to them, but they sued me, when I left. And then I had to represent myself in court, kind of thing. But yeah, it's been quite the journey since I left.
So when you talk about 9 women leaving at the same time, is this what's known as the NXIVM Nine?
Yes.
And you each go through the court system in an attempt to get damages from NXIVM to get money paid back to you?
No, just no, none of us tried to get our monies back after we left. 3 of us got sued.
Right. So the NXIVM Nine, you all leave. 3 of you are served with court papers. What is the basis of NXIVM trying to sue you?
Well, Barbara got sued because she was the Brofman's financial planner. And so the Brofmans sued her, and then NXIVM sued her because they could. So, I mean, just because in the United States, you can sue anybody because you want to sue anybody. And then we got sued because we could, and so they came in and claimed all kinds of stuff, like we destroyed their business, that we tried to extort money from them and stuff like that. And so, like, we couldn't afford an attorney. So I represented us as our own attorney. It's called pro se. And the judge, here I am standing in front of the judge, and he's like, these, Miss Stones, these are very serious charges against you, and I really recommend you get an attorney. And I'm like, I said, Your Honor, I don't have any money. I said, I'm more than broke, and I said, I'd love to get an attorney. And every attorney I've called, they just Google NXIVM, and they're litigious. And I said, they want, $20,000 to $50,000 retainer, which I don't have. And I said, this is going to cost me at least $500,000, and I don't have that kind of money. I said, I apologize. You're stuck
Yeah.
with me. And I said, I know judges hate pro se attorneys, but yeah, I said, I'll do my best to be as professional as I can. And I've studied a little bit about law. I took an online course, how to represent myself. And I
What
said,
did
it'll
the
take
judge
me.
say?
He just kind of rolled his eyes. And I said, and I said, it'll take me 3 months to prove to you that this is, a, a litigious, lawsuit, and to prove that this is a cult. But I will prove to you that this is a cult. I said, it looks good because it's got the Brofman name behind it, and they say they're an international company, but they're really an international cult. I said, but I will prove to you that these are all lies against us. And I did. So I
You
beat
won you won your court case. That's wild.
7 NXIVM's attorneys, high paid attorneys.
To stand in front of a judge and say, I don't have any money to defend myself against a group that's accusing me of trying to extort them out of money because they've taken all of my money, is another one of those like convoluted things, isn't it? It's another one of those like, whoa, how did we get from there to there? And what a remarkable thing to do, to represent yourself, educate yourself, and win your court case. It's one of the most like badass stories I've ever heard.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I did um I called Rick Ross's attorney, Peter Skolnick, and then another guy, his name is Joe O'Hara, and neither one of them could represent me, but they said, well, we'll do our best to help you, because like I didn't know how to have a form to even write. Legal papers have to be in a certain form and stuff, and have dyslexia, so I have a hard time writing anyways. And so, and like I did take this online course, and it tells you, like which motions are which and stuff like that. But, and they are good at document dumping, and, like sometimes I'd have to file 2 or 3 motions in a week and stuff like that. And so they both helped me, oh, like I would write the motion out, and then I'd send it to Joe, and Joe would proofread it for me and stuff like that. And so I had some help in regards to that. But then I'd have to go to motion court, and that's when you file a motion, and the motion has to be heard, and then the attorneys come to court, and then you have to present your motion in front of each other and stuff like that. And the judge would always make us go last. And I could never figure out why the judge would make us go last. And then we'd sit there, have to show up, and then you have to find out where your name is on the calendar, kind of thing. And I'd be like, gosh, we're last. And this friend of mine, he's actually from New Zealand. He would come with me and we'd sit there and I'd be like, oh, we're last again. And his name's Andrew. And we'd sit there and and then we'd have to watch all these other motions go. And I'd be like, God, why does he always make us go last? And then finally one day it caught on to me and I leaned over to Andrew and I'd say, I know why we go last, Andrew. And he'd be, why is that? I go, because the judge doesn't want to poison his court with NXIVM's games, because they would just play all these stupid games in court, and they would lie to the judge and stuff like that. And I'd catch them in all these lies. And that's the one good thing about representing myself, is I knew all their lies, where an attorney might not know that. And so they would say something in court and I'd be like, Your Honor, blah, blah, blah. And then the judge would have his clerk look through old documents that they'd already presented. And I'd catch him in a lie in court and he'd be like, oh, you're right, Miss Stones, blah, blah, blah. And so I caught them a lot of times with their pants down in court. And that's what got the judge into believing that they were not up front. And, is when you catch them in lies. And then they filed a subpoena for my emails in my phone records. You're supposed to give 2 weeks notice to do that. And they didn't know that I knew that, right? And so they filed a subpoena to get my phone records and my emails. They served me on a Friday. And the subpoena was supposed to be to my for my email records and my phone records on a Monday. Well, I filed a motion to quash because I knew what that was. So then I filed a motion to quash, an emergency motion to quash, and that pissed the judge off that they did that to little pro se me, right? And so then the judge, that pissed him off, and he said, you will not file another subpoena in this court until you come through me first.
Wow.
So anytime they served somebody to depose them, they had to go through the judge. So I knew who they were going to try to depose. And then I'd call that person and say, hey, you're going to get a subpoena to be deposed. And so this friend of mine, her and her husband just went on an extended vacation, so they couldn't depose her. They were retired.
After your court battle and
Victory.
well, I mean, yeah, victory. How did that happen? It's not like a case with a jury. It's a case where the judge decides the outcome of the trial.
Well, I could pick both, but I decided I was going to put my faith in the judge because he knew the law better than a jury would. And I didn't know if the jury would be swayed by the Brofman name.
Right.
But yeah, but Claire Brofman came out. She was NXIVM's witness. And I don't know why they sent her, but like I had her all over the courtroom, she wouldn't answer a straight question, and then I would ask her a question. She'd be like, well, he's a van God. And I'd be like, what does that have to do with anything? I'd be like, why did you send her out of anybody?
Do you remember what the judge said to you on the day he made his decision?
Well, he just did a written decision and sent it out. So it was
Right, okay.
27-page decision. One thing he did say is that he said, he did mention that he didn't use the word anger. He used another word that, that I obviously had some anger, which I think was justified. They jerked me around for 9 years. They threw me into total bankruptcy, that kind of thing. And, of course I was angry.
The verdict and the victory in court, was that able to help you pay back some of that debt that you had?
No, my debt got wiped clean. Yeah, because
that was the ruling from the court.
Yes. Yeah. So my debt got wiped clean. But the other thing that came out really good in that court case is that they tried to use their confidentiality agreement as a weapon against people. And the judge said that the confidentiality agreement only took place when people were in class and they wore their sashes and the mission statement had been read. So they couldn't use their confidentiality agreement in any other case. So like if I was having a side conversation with Nancy, like at her house, they couldn't use their confidentiality agreement in a case like that. So they couldn't use their, and so that was a precedent setting decision that he made that went towards anybody in NXIVM. So the thing is that he set that up so that they couldn't use their confidentiality agreement against as a weapon against anybody else, because this was done in federal court.
So this judge, do you think that he's anticipating further court cases that would involve NXIVM?
Well, NXIVM doesn't exist anymore because Keith was when he was arrested and tried, the DOJ took ownership of NXIVM.
The case against Keith Ranieri, where he was found guilty, did
And
that
Nancy
trial
was
happen before or after your trial?
um
Your court case, sorry.
no, it took place before. My trial was in 2010. So the judge made that decision so that anybody after me, up until the time that NXIVM was dissolved, they could no longer use their confidentiality agreement as a weapon against anybody else. And I think that, like, when we had to go to mediation before we went to trial, and when we went to mediation with a judge up in Seattle, another federal judge. And the judge in Seattle, when we went to mediation, she kept us separate from, I think, I know Claire was there, and then the attorneys in Seattle. And we got there early, and so the judge put us in a room, and she had a stack of papers, folders of papers, and she said, I've studied this case pretty intensely. So she says, I think I have a pretty good idea of what's going on. She told us that. And she said, I'm going to keep you guys separated because I don't think it's a good idea to put you in with the plaintiffs today. So I'm just going to go back and forth between the two rooms. And I said, okay. And she said, I just think it's better for you ladies to not put you in with them and stuff. And so I think the judge there, in my opinion, I mean, I don't know, I'm speaking for the judge because she never said anything beyond that, but I think the judge had a pretty good idea that the case was bogus to begin with, and we didn't reach any agreements in the mediation. In my opinion, they just, they asked me to lie about lying. They wanted me to say that I lied about everything that I said about NXIVM. And I told the judge that was mediating, I said, so they want me to lie about lying? They want me to say that I lied about everything about NXIVM? I said, that's a lie, And I said, I'll take my chances in court, It's just like, I can't do that.
So your court case happened in 2010. Are you aware at this point of the allegations against Keith Ranieri? Have you heard from some of those women that were involved in DOS, like Sarah Edmondson? Are they
Mm-hmm.
speaking to you at this point? Right. So
Oh, yeah.
when did you first hear about the stuff that was happening in Albany? And who were the first people to come to you and tell you what had been going on up there?
Well, I stayed abreast of everything that was going on. I never left the battlefield of NXIVM. So I fought the whole entire time. I stayed in touch with state and federal agencies. The I was in it for the long haul. I've been a cult advocate ever since I left, and still am. So I mean, that's kind of what I do now. And so I heard about DOS from I think it was Frank Perlato, called me and asked me if I, because he was contacted about it first. And so, but as people left NXIVM, people would call me, and talk to me about, what was going on and stuff. So I kind of became the safe harbor for people to contact when they left NXIVM and stuff like that. And, I went to part of the trial. I went to all of the sentencing. Well, I didn't go to all the sentencings. I didn't go to Allison Mack's sentencing, and I didn't go to Kathy Russell's sentencing. But I went to Nancy's, I went to Keith's, I went to Claire's, I went to Lauren's sentencing and stuff. So I stayed up on the case quite a bit. And, I've read every court document that has come out of the trial and stuff like that. But just knowing Keith's nature, I knew that he was going to amp up his behavior, because you take a person like Keith and he's going to amp it up, and then he's going to get tired of that, that's just not going to be enough for him. And then he's got to amp it up a little bit more, and that's not going to be enough for him. And then he's got to amp it up a little bit more, and that's not going to be enough for him. And so, in that I knew he would eventually do something that was too much, and then the authorities would come in. And so some people, some cult leaders, they have better impulse control, and they're not going to step over that line where the government's going to say, that's too much. We're not going to let you get away with that kind of thing. And so, and so they can get away with it for a lot longer, where some cult leaders, they just don't have that impulse control, and they have to amp up that behavior kind of thing. And so I knew eventually that Keith would step over that line. But I was just amazed at, how much people just put up with in regards to him. When I heard about how bad Janess got and how bad SOP was, and, that kind of stuff. And I'm just like, people's tolerance for the abuse was just, God, I was amazed with what people put up with. And I mean, I think my shelf was made out of like really weak wood, and some people's were like made out of redwood forest trees. It's just like, oh my God, it's just like, I don't know, it's just like, God, you guys had tree trunks for shelves, those shelves that the red flags went up on. It's just like, it's like, thank God for Bonnie Peace. It's just like, her finally waking up and saying enough. Because that's really what it took, is for her to just wake up and then pull Mark out. And then Mark, that's one thing I have to say about Mark, is that when Mark woke up, that was really
this
Mark
is Mark
Vicente, yeah. But it really took his wife to wake up, and for her to say, I'm willing to walk away from my marriage, to
Wow.
wake Mark up.
And was Bonnie a member of DOS?
No.
But she had an understanding of some of the things that were happening in that inner circle?
Yeah. Well, I think she saw the maturation taking place in women, the being too thin and stuff like that. I don't know if she knew about what was going on in DOS, if somebody had come to her and said, hey, look, this is what's happening. I don't know the full story about that. I haven't talked to her about that. I mean, Bonnie and I are, I would say, pretty good friends, and we do talk and stuff like that. But I don't know the full story on that. I haven't really asked her about it, because I think that that's too traumatic for her still at this point. But I know that she walked away and told Mark that, you're putting our marriage in jeopardy, and that it took Mark a little bit longer to kind of wake up, but that when he did, he and Mark and I were pretty good friends while I was in, and I tried to warn Mark about certain things, but I had to be careful because Mark was he wasn't in the inner circle, but he was right next to the inner circle. And you can only say so much without like it reflecting back on me in a really bad way. And I think that that's why in season 1 of The Vow, Mark came to me, and wanted to, you know, work at making amends with me,
Mhm.
kind of thing, is because he knew I tried to warn him about things that were going on, kind of thing. But yeah, so I never left the battlefield. I was in there trying to wake people up sublingually, and or not sublingually, that's underneath the tongue, but subliminally trying to do that. And I was always trying to get to some kind of authority. They just had too much protection in the Northern District of New York. It was actually the Eastern District, and that actually woke them up. And really what it took is the New York Times story with Sarah Edmondson showing her brand that got the DOJ's attention. That's what Moira Pinza saw, and she started doing research, and then she got a hold of Sarah Edmondson's attorney and said, I want to talk to this woman, but
Moira Penza's the woman that well, the prosecutor who
yeah, the head
managed to get,
prosecutor.
and
Yeah,
the really, the brave and just ultimately courageous, and again, like kick assery of the women coming forward to testify in court to the abuse that they were subjected to, and Moira Penza as the prosecutor. It was like a perfect storm and combination of things that ris- that ended in Keith Raniere receiving 120 years in prison. And in The Vow season 2, I was laughing at you walking out of the courtroom saying maybe they'll take a couple of years off for good behavior.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny because there was so many moving parts in the whole takedown of Keith, you know, in there was no one person that took down NXIVM. There there it was a village that took him down, really. And so it's funny because somebody, people will say, "Oh, it was Catherine Oxenberg," and it was Sarah Edmondson, and oh, it was Mark Vicente. None of those people are stepping up to the plate saying, "Oh, it was me," but it's people in the background saying, "Oh, it was," but none of those people say, "Oh yeah, it was me that did that," and it's like no one person ever says that. It was a whole village. I mean, the FBI called so many people. I got called several times by the FBI. Everybody got called by the FBI, that kind of thing. And so, it, there were so many moving parts because it was a RICO act. They could go way back into different aspects of what was happening, that kind of thing. Like, I couldn't leave the country without calling the FBI because there were charges pending against me in Mexico. Myself, Barbara Boucher, there were several of us that had charges pending against us in Mexico. So like we couldn't leave the country without calling the FBI because, we didn't want to get hauled into the consulate in Mexico, because then if we got hauled in there, we could get taken down to Mexico. I don't want to be in a Mexico prison. I didn't do anything in Mexico, but Keith, through some of the people in Mexico, charged us with extortion and some other things that we didn't do in Mexico, but that's what they did. So hopefully now I can, those charges have been taken care of. If the people in Mexico that left NXIVM have cleared those up, then hopefully we can, but I'm not going to Mexico because I don't know if they've been cleared up,
Yeah,
and
I
Keith
would
still,
I would not be taking any chances myself, I don't think.
yeah, yeah. So Mexico's off my travel list, but he still has other people down there that could, you know, put other charges against us because, I'm not a fan of Keith. And so I speak out. I don't really speak out against him. I just inform people like, oh, Keith has filed another civil suit, against the
Mm.
BOP. But they think that that's bad. His followers still think that that's bad that I mention anything about him.
So NXIVM itself is now a defunct like corporation, but Keith Raniere himself does have devotees, followers, believers, supporters, of various degrees in various parts of the world. which is interesting. I can understand how and why, but I still do think it's interesting. And you mentioned that nobody is stepping up to the plate to take responsibility or recognition for the takedown of Keith Raniere and NXIVM. But Sarah Edmondson has published her memoir Scarred and hosts a podcast named
Mm-hmm.
A Little Bit Culty with her husband,
Mm-hmm.
who was also a former member of NXIVM. And Mark Vicente has had a hand in creating documentaries that expose and highlight NXIVM and Keith Raniere's abuses, and also has a podcast called What the Fuck is on My Mind,
Mm-hmm.
or WTF is on my mind, where he discusses his thoughts on the Vow season 2 and other things NXIVM related, which is interesting. And you also have your own platform that you are using for your own sort of, well, some people have mentioned that Sarah Edmondson's and Mark Vicente's work is to give back to the people that were harmed by their complicitness in NXIVM, and they have I think spoken to that as well. But also it's to educate and educate people about cults and coercive control, and to prevent that from happening to others. And your platform has a similar mission statement, but it's also kind of educational, recovery based. So I wondered if you could just tell the listeners all about the work that you're doing, and where they can find it, and what your plans are for this work in the future.
Yeah. Well, I started a website, and it's for it's about survivors of trauma recovery. And so I'm gonna do some podcasts in the future. I'm not really set up to do that. And so I will be doing some podcasts of cult survivors in the future about that. But I'll also be doing some some recovery of trauma victims, because I think they're a lot hand in hand in regards to that. But I'm also going to do some stuff around healthy living, because I think a lot of times when people leave cults, a lot of times we have a tendency to not take care of our health in regards to that. And that's a big thing, because there's a lot of stress involved in being in a cult, and there's a lot of stress involved in cult recovery. And so I'm going to do some stuff in regards to stress and health, and then healthy living in regards to eating and taking better care of our health. I know when I left, and you see that in the vow, where I'm in the vow, I actually put on quite a bit of weight, that kind of thing. And so I since have lost most of that weight and stuff, and take better care of my health in regards to that. And being a healthcare provider, I think it's an important thing to take care of our health. And then I have another project where I want to create a thing for people who are involved in legal action. And that's pretty much in a very infancy state. But I've talked to several solicitors and attorneys that find it kind of a brilliant thing, where a lot of people, when they leave cults, they want to become therapists. And so what I'm looking at is possibly starting to just simplify it. It's called an attorney in a box, but it's not really that way, where people who can't afford an attorney will know how to become their own attorney. But then they'll have help in regards to that, where if they need some help with that, there'll be some law firms out there where people can be able to give them the kind of help that I received. I had a couple of attorneys that were willing to help me through my thing. And then through that, where maybe not attorneys, but some paralegals or some legal assistants will be able to help them be able to do that, so that, because a lot of
That
times
sounds
people,
incredible. Oh, it sounds
yeah,
incredible.
yeah. So that's just it's kind of just a baby project, but I want to be able to do that, and then be able to help that. Uh, I really want to turn it into an international program, so that, I mean, I don't know in some countries if you can represent yourself, but I don't want people to feel like if they're being threatened by a cult that they don't have help somewhere.
That sounds absolutely incredible to provide lay people with the tools needed to represent themselves in court to fight against the the big guys with the big lawyers and the dirty tactics. And I think that is going to be such an incredible resource. I'm really excited to see where that goes and what happens with that, and a podcast as well. And we'll have to keep up to date with all of the stuff that you're working on so that we can let the listeners know where all of this is happening and where they can tune in, and where they can
Mhm.
access your resources and get help. And what amazing things that you're doing, Susan. Oh, it's just
Yeah.
it's exciting. Do you feel like you found something that will help you continue to recover from your experiences?
Oh, yeah. Well, I did a lot of therapy. Gosh, I was in therapy for a long time. I'm not actively involved in therapy right now. Although, I can see my therapist, not whenever I want, but I can make an appointment to go see her if I need a little tune-up kind of thing. But, you know, it took me a while to find a therapist that I gelled with. I don't think therapy is a bad thing. It's just finding a therapist that is a good fit for you, that kind of thing. And then, I'm constantly looking for, um, I took some of Yanya Lalage's online courses. Right now, they're on a break from that, but I found those to be beneficial for me. And then, you know, they also have an online support group that's available. I think I'm going to start working with her on her online courses. I mean, her online support groups kind of thing. Um, it's possible I'll start offering some online support classes, that kind of thing. I'm going to start doing some consulting in the probably the near future in regards to like healthy living, that kind of stuff. And I'm always looking for resources. The other thing I offer on my website, if people want to do a blog on their story, that I offer that. I have a couple of people that have done their own blog posts on their story. I have a woman, she just sent me her third part of her story in regards to that. To make that available. There's only so much you can tell about your story on Twitter and social media, that kind of thing. So I've made that available for people as a platform to be able to tell their story, that kind of stuff. And so my my website is a survivor's website. It's not just my website, and I'm open in the in the future to change the website. I just did it under my name so that people would it'd be a place that people could recognize. So I'm not against in the future changing it to a different name, because you can do that and point it to any name, that kind of thing. But so that's why I opened it to be a survivor's website, the survivor of trauma's website. And so, and I just started it out talking about NXIVM because that's what I know about, but I'm not opposed to opening it up to, a cult survivors website, that kind of thing. But I just did it, and I did it over Thanksgiving weekend because that's when I had the most free time to be able to do that. So, yeah, I just did it so people would have a platform to, because a lot of people are like, this is mine, it's mine, kind of thing. It's mine, but uh, mine is yours, kind of thing. That's how I feel, because not everybody wants to start a website. Not everybody wants to, do their own podcast and stuff like that. So, um, Yeah, and somebody said, "Oh, you're starting a community," and like, I don't want people to think I'm starting a community because, we have such phobias about being involved in a community kind of thing. I just don't wanna be involved with people who wanna manipulate my community kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds as if there is some amazing and inspiring work coming out from the activism that you're doing, Susan. I think that sounds what everybody needs. Come and tell me about your trauma and get legal advice at the same time. And I'll also tell you how you can live a healthy lifestyle. I think it's just like you're wearing all the hats, and I think it's absolutely awesome. So the website is susandones.com.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'll make sure I put a link to that in the episode description, and also keep the listeners up to date with any of the changes and progressions that you're making with these various projects, in case anyone ever has a need to access any of them or just wants to see what it's all about. So that brings us to the end of our conversation. There's hours and hours and hours and hours more that we could talk about. I mean, we've really not even scratched the surface of your experience, but also of the whole subject itself.
Yeah.
There's just so much more to the subject of ESP, NXIVM, and all the other smaller groups that existed under the banner of NXIVM, and just of the cult leader himself, and just how coercive and manipulative he really was, as an individual. um but now
Well,
he's in
yeah.
prison and he gets punched in the face and all sorts. So,
Well, and
life's not
Nancy
as,
too. I mean, Nancy Salzman just flew under the radar with the whole thing, and so, yeah, she's just as manipulative too.
yeah, even if she says to the camera that she's not, uh,
Well,
which
yeah.
people can watch in the Vow season 2 if they would like to know what we're referring to there. So thank you so much for your time
You're
today,
so
Susan.
welcome.
Oh, I really appreciated your conversation with me about NXIVM. We went all the way back to the beginning. We talked about the fundamentals and the basics of ESP. So anybody that has not heard of the group NXIVM, I think would have a good understanding of that now after our conversation today, but also an understanding of your experiences and the things that you endured that you're now really taking and putting a positive spin on, and making something good out of something bad. And I think that that's absolutely exceptional. I don't know that many people would be able to do that, let alone win their own court case where they represent themselves and the judge say, yeah, this woman, you're not going to use your underhanded tactics against this woman. All of it's just
Right.
an inspiration. So thank you so much for your time, Susan. I really appreciate you, and I'm really excited for all the work that you're going to be putting into the world.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Take care, Susan. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, you too.